The crack of a rifle shattered the morning stillness over Willow Creek, but Vincent Norwood didn't even blink. The bullet had struck just inches from his boot, kicking up dust on the main street, yet his weathered face remained as impassive as carved granite while townsfolk scattered for cover. "That's far enough, Norwood," Sheriff Johnson bellowed from the jailhouse porch, lowering his smoking Winchester. "Thought I made it clear last time you weren't welcome back in these parts." Vincent didn't quicken his pace, nor did he slow it. The tall cowboy continued his measured stride toward the sheriff, spurs jingling with each deliberate step. His dark eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of his black Stetson, betrayed no fear, no anger, not even mild annoyance at nearly being shot. "Need supplies," Vincent said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried across the 15 feet separating the two men. "Then I'll be gone." It was May 1878, and Willow Creek was like most frontier towns in Wyoming Territory, wary of strangers and downright hostile to those with reputations like Vincent Norwood's. 3 years as a bounty hunter had earned him plenty of enemies and a nickname that followed him everywhere: Stone Face. Few remembered him any other way, though there had been a time before the war, before the losses, when laughter came easily to him. Sheriff Johnson spit a stream of tobacco juice. 1 hour, then ride out. He gestured to the general store. "Jameson's got what you need, don't cause trouble." Vincent offered no acknowledgement beyond a slight nod before continuing down the dusty street. Whispers followed him, mothers pulled children aside, men's hands drifted toward holstered revolvers. He paid them no mind. Their fear meant nothing to him. In fact, it served him well in his line of work. Inside Jameson's general store, he removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature gray at the temples. At 32, Vincent looked a decade older, his face weathered by sun and hardship, with a long scar running from his left ear to his jaw, a souvenir from a knife fight in Dodge City 2 years prior. "Mr. Norwood," Albert Jameson said nervously from behind the counter. "What can I help you with today?" Vincent placed a list on the counter. "Need everything here." As Jameson gathered the supplies, the bell over the door jingled. Vincent didn't turn, his peripheral vision enough to register a woman entering. He kept his attention on the shopkeeper until a soft voice spoke directly to him. "Excuse me, but you're blocking the flour barrel." He stepped aside without looking at her, but as she moved past, the scent of lavender caught him off guard. It was a familiar scent, one that triggered memories he'd spent years burying. "Thank you," she said, and something in her tone made him turn. She was perhaps 28, with chestnut hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet. Her blue dress was simple but well made, and though she wore no jewelry save for a thin gold band on her left hand, there was an undeniable elegance about her. When she looked up at him, her eyes widened slightly. "You're Vincent Norwood," she said, not a question but a statement of fact. He gave a curt nod, expecting the usual reaction: fear, disgust, or morbid curiosity. What he didn't expect was her extended hand. "Sarah Thornton. I've just moved to town with my daughter." When he didn't immediately take her hand, she added, "My late husband spoke of you. He served with you at Shiloh." Vincent reluctantly shook her hand, his expression unchanged despite his surprise. "Many men at Shiloh. Don't recall names." "Jacob Thornton. He said you saved his life during the retreat." The name stirred something in his memory: a young private, barely 18, pinned down by Union fire. Vincent had carried him to safety after the boy took a mini-A ball to the leg. "He made it home then," Vincent said. "He did." A shadow crossed her face. "Passed 2 years ago. Influenza." Vincent offered no condolences. Words meant little against loss, he knew that better than most. Jameson returned with Vincent's supplies. "That'll be $3.45, Mr. Norwood." As Vincent counted out the money, Sarah Thornton selected her items. She was having trouble reaching a tin of coffee on a high shelf. Without thinking, Vincent reached over her and brought it down, placing it in her basket. "Thank you," she said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "My daughter Emma will be pleased. That's her favorite." Vincent nodded, gathered his supplies, and placed his hat back on his head. As he turned to leave, Sarah spoke again. "Mr. Norwood, I'm hosting a small gathering tomorrow evening, a way to meet my neighbors. You'd be welcome to join us." The invitation was so unexpected that for the briefest moment, surprise flickered across Vincent's face before the familiar mask returned. "Not staying," he said simply, then walked out, aware of every eye in the store following him. Outside, he secured his supplies to his horse, a sturdy black gelding named Midnight. His plan had been to ride out immediately, head north toward the Montana Territory, where a wanted cattle rustler was rumored to be hiding. Yet something, perhaps the unexpected encounter with Sarah Thornton, or perhaps just weariness from the trail, made him reconsider. The Silver Dollar Saloon stood across the street, promising whiskey and a hot meal. His hour wasn't up yet. Vincent led Midnight to the hitching post and stepped inside the establishment. The saloon fell silent as he entered. The bartender, a burly man with a handlebar mustache, eyed him warily but nodded toward an empty table in the corner. Vincent took the seat, his back to the wall, facing the door, a habit born of necessity in his line of work. "Whiskey," he said when the bartender approached, "and whatever's cooking." "Stew today," the man replied. "3 bits for both." Vincent placed the coins on the table, and the bartender retreated quickly. While waiting for his meal, he watched the other patrons gradually return to their conversations, though many still cast uneasy glances his way. The whiskey arrived first, cheap but strong. Vincent downed it in one swallow, welcoming the familiar burn. When the stew came, he ate methodically, neither savoring nor complaining about the bland fare. He was nearly finished when the batwing doors swung open again, and Sarah Thornton entered, accompanied by a young girl who couldn't be more than 10. Vincent watched as several men immediately stood, offering their seats. Sarah declined politely, her eyes scanning the room until they found him in the corner. To his dismay, she headed straight for his table, the child following closely behind. "Mr. Norwood," she greeted him, "may we join you? Every other table seems occupied." It wasn't true. There were at least 2 empty tables, but Vincent found himself nodding despite his preference for solitude. "Emma, this is Mr. Norwood," Sarah said as they sat. "He knew your father during the war." The girl studied him with frank curiosity. She had her mother's features but darker hair, nearly black, pulled into 2 neat braids. "Did you fight in lots of battles?" Emma asked without preamble. "Emma," Sarah gently reprimanded, "that's not a polite question to ask someone you've just met." "It's all right," Vincent said, surprising himself. "Yes, too many." Emma nodded solemnly. "Papa didn't like talking about the war either. He said some memories are best left buried." Vincent met the child's gaze, struck by the wisdom in her young eyes. "Your father was right." Sarah ordered food for herself and Emma, then turned her attention back to Vincent. "Have you reconsidered my invitation for tomorrow evening?" "Leaving town," he replied. "The sheriff gave you until noon tomorrow," a voice interrupted. Sheriff Johnson stood beside their table, his expression a mix of suspicion and confusion as he looked between Vincent and Sarah. "Mrs. Thornton, I wasn't aware you were acquainted with Mr. Norwood." "My husband served with him," Sarah explained, "and Mr. Norwood has been nothing but courteous since we met." The sheriff seemed unconvinced. "Well, just so you know, Norwood here has quite a reputation. They call him Stone-Face because no man's ever seen him show emotion, not when collecting bounties, not even when facing down the barrel of a gun. Vincent stared at his empty plate, unmoved by the sheriff's words. They were nothing he hadn't heard before. "I find nicknames rarely capture the true measure of a person," Sarah said coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Sheriff, our food is arriving." Johnson tipped his hat, looking somewhat chastened. "Just doing my duty, madam. Enjoy your meal." He walked away, casting one last warning glance at Vincent. "You don't need to defend me," Vincent said once the sheriff was out of earshot. "I wasn't defending you," Sarah replied, cutting Emma's steak into smaller pieces. "I was stating a fact. I don't judge people based on rumors." They ate in silence for a while, Vincent nursing a second whiskey he didn't really want, just to have a reason to remain at the table. It had been years since he'd shared a meal with anyone, let alone a woman and child. "Where do you live, Mr. Norwood?" Emma asked eventually, breaking the silence. "Nowhere in particular." "Everyone lives somewhere," she insisted. "Emma," Sarah cautioned. "It's fine," Vincent said. "I travel." "For work." "What kind of work?" Emma pressed. Vincent hesitated. "I find people who don't want to be found." "You mean bad people?" Emma's eyes widened. "Sometimes." "Is that how you got that scar?" She pointed to his face. "Emma, that's enough questions," Sarah said firmly. "Mr. Norwood isn't here for an interrogation." Vincent found himself almost smiling at the girl's directness. "Yes," he told her. "That's how I got the scar." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this confirmation. "I have a scar too," she confided, rolling up her sleeve to reveal a small, jagged line on her forearm. "I fell from Mr. Peterson's apple tree last autumn." "Emma loves climbing things she shouldn't," Sarah explained, a fond exasperation in her voice. Vincent studied the girl's scar. "Clean break." Emma nodded proudly. "The doctor said I was very brave." "Looks like it healed well," he observed. Sarah watched this exchange with interest, noting how Vincent's usually rigid posture had relaxed slightly while talking to Emma. When they finished their meal, she insisted on paying for all three of them despite Vincent's objection. "Consider it thanks for your kindness to Jacob," she said. "Whatever you remember of him." As they stood to leave, Emma tugged on Vincent's sleeve. "Will you come to Mama's party tomorrow?" "Please?" "No one in town talks to us much yet." Vincent looked down at the hopeful face, then at Sarah, who waited for his answer without pressing. "Might still be here," he conceded, which was more than he'd intended to offer. Outside the saloon, they parted ways, Sarah and Emma toward their home on the edge of town, Vincent toward the livery where he'd arranged to stable Midnight for the night. He decided to stay at the small hotel above the saloon, telling himself it was just to rest before the long ride north. But as he settled onto the lumpy mattress that night, Vincent found his thoughts returning to Sarah Thornton. There was something refreshing about her directness, her lack of fear or judgment. And the child, Emma, with her innocent questions and easy acceptance, had stirred something long dormant within him. He slept poorly as usual, waking before dawn. From his window, he could see the town coming to life, the baker opening his shop, ranch hands heading out for the day's work, a stagecoach arriving with mail and passengers. Vincent spent the morning tending to Midnight and cleaning his weapons, a Colt Peacemaker and a Winchester rifle, both well-maintained despite hard use. By mid-morning, he'd run out of tasks to occupy himself. The deadline set by Sheriff Johnson came and went. Vincent remained in his room, telling himself he was just waiting for the noon stage to bring news of his quarry's whereabouts. But when afternoon arrived with no such information, he still made no move to leave. Instead, He found himself walking toward the small house at the edge of town that the saloon keeper had identified as belonging to the new widow woman. It was a modest place with a freshly painted white fence and spring flowers beginning to bloom in the front yard. Vincent stood across the street for nearly 10 minutes, watching as townspeople arrived bearing dishes and packages. The gathering Sarah had mentioned was clearly underway. Several times he nearly turned to leave, but something kept him rooted there, observing the warm light spilling from the windows and the sounds of conversation and occasional laughter. Finally, as the sun began to set, he crossed the street. He had no gift to bring, nothing to offer except his presence, which few people ever welcomed. Still, he found himself opening the gate and walking up to the front door. Before he could knock, the door swung open and Emma stood there, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "You came," she exclaimed. "Mama said you might not, but I knew you would." Vincent nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the child's enthusiasm. "Not staying long." "Come in anyway," Emma said, grabbing his hand with surprising boldness. "Mama made apple pie." She pulled him inside, where about a dozen people were gathered in the small parlor and adjoining dining room. Conversation faltered as heads turned toward the newcomer. Vincent recognized most of them: the sheriff, the storekeeper, the saloon keeper, and other townsfolk who had always given him a wide berth. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. Her face brightened when she saw him, genuine pleasure evident in her expression. "Mr. Norwood, I'm so glad you decided to join us," she said, crossing the room to greet him. "Please make yourself comfortable. There's food and drink in the dining room." The other guests watched this exchange with obvious curiosity and some suspicion. Sheriff Johnson in particular seemed unhappy with Vincent's presence, but he said nothing, merely nodding stiffly from across the room. "Told Emma I can't stay," Vincent said quietly. "Stay as long as you like," Sarah replied. "Emma's been talking about you all day." "It seems you made quite an impression." Before Vincent could respond, Emma returned, tugging him toward a table laden with food. "You have to try everything," she insisted. "Mama's the best cook in Wyoming Territory." For the next hour, Vincent endured what was, for him, an unusual form of torture: social interaction. He stood mostly silent while neighbors inquired about Sarah's plans for her property, offered condolences on her loss, and asked after Emma's schooling. Several attempted to draw Vincent into conversation, but his responses were so brief that most quickly gave up. Only Emma seemed undeterred by his reticence. She returned to his side repeatedly, bringing him food, introducing him to her kitten, a small orange tabby named Butterscotch, and showing him a book of pressed wildflowers she'd collected. "Papa started this with me," she explained as they sat on a bench in the corner, away from the main gathering. "We were going to collect every flower in Wyoming." Vincent carefully turned the pages, noting the meticulous arrangement of dried blossoms, each labeled in a child's careful script, with occasional additions in a man's handwriting. "You're continuing it," he observed. Emma nodded solemnly. "Mama says it's a way to keep Papa's memory alive." "Do you have something to remember people by, Mr. Norwood?" The question caught him off guard. In truth, he carried nothing sentimental. He'd long ago discarded or buried such things along with his emotions. "No," he admitted. Emma considered this. "That seems sad. Everyone should have something to remember the people they've lost." The simple wisdom in her words struck him deeply. Before he could respond, Sarah approached with a plate of apple pie. "I saved you a piece," she said, handing it to him. "Emma tells me it's her mission to make sure you sample everything." "She's persistent," Vincent said, accepting the pie. Sarah smiled. "Like her father." She sat beside Emma, smoothing her daughter's hair. "I see she's showing you the flower collection." "It's impressive," Vincent said, taking a bite of the pie. The sweet tart flavor burst on his tongue, reminding him of autumns long past, of his mother's kitchen before the war had changed everything. "This is good," he said after a moment, and was rewarded with Sarah's smile brightening further. "High praise, coming from a man of few words," she teased gently. As the evening progressed, guests began to depart. Vincent remained, telling himself he would leave after finishing his pie. Then, after helping Sarah move a heavy sideboard that one of the neighbors had mentioned was positioned poorly. When the last guest besides himself had gone, he knew he had no more excuses to stay. "I should go," he said, standing awkwardly in the parlor as Sarah returned from putting Emma to bed. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It meant a lot to Emma, and to me." Vincent nodded, reaching for his hat. "You have a nice home here." "It's coming along," Sarah agreed. "Though there's still much to do. The previous owner let many things fall into disrepair." Vincent hesitated at the door. "If you need help with repairs, I'm handy with tools." The offer surprised them both. Vincent hadn't planned to stay in Willow Creek beyond tonight, yet here he was, essentially offering to extend his visit. "That's very kind," Sarah said. "I'd be grateful for any assistance. The barn roof, in particular, needs attention before the summer rains come." "I'll look at it tomorrow," Vincent said, settling his hat on his head. "I'll expect you for breakfast then," Sarah replied. 7 o'clock. Vincent nodded and stepped out into the night, wondering what had possessed him to make such an offer. As he walked back to his hotel room, he realized it had been years since anyone had looked at him the way Sarah Thornton did, without fear or judgment, seeing a man rather than a legend. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Vincent arrived at the Thornton house precisely at 7, having already visited the general store to purchase supplies for the barn roof repairs. Sarah greeted him with coffee and a breakfast of flapjacks and bacon, which they ate at the kitchen table while Emma chattered about her plans to collect new wildflowers for her book. "Perhaps Mr. Norwood knows where to find some interesting specimens," Sarah suggested. Vincent considered this. "Wild bergamot grows near the creek south of town. Purple coneflower too." Emma's eyes widened. "You know about flowers?" "Some," Vincent admitted. "My mother kept a garden." It was the first personal detail he had shared, and he saw Sarah register this with a small smile. After breakfast, Vincent examined the barn roof. As Sarah had said, it needed significant work. Several shingles were missing, and one section had begun to sag dangerously. He spent the morning removing the damaged portions, while Sarah worked in her vegetable garden nearby, the two of them existing in a comfortable silence broken only by occasional questions or observations. When noon came, Sarah called him in for dinner, a hearty stew with fresh bread. Emma had returned from her morning lessons with the local teacher and peppered Vincent with questions about his work, his travels, and his horse. "Midnight is a fine name for a black horse," she approved. "Can I meet him sometime?" "Emma, Mr. Norwood is busy with the roof," Sarah reminded her. "It's all right," Vincent said. "I can bring him by tomorrow." The word tomorrow hung in the air. Vincent had not planned to stay another day, yet he found himself increasingly reluctant to leave. As the afternoon wore on, Vincent worked steadily on the roof, while occasionally glancing at Sarah tending her garden. There was something soothing about watching her methodical movements, the care she took with each plant. When she looked up and caught him watching, he didn't look away as he might have once done. Instead, he raised a hand in acknowledgement, and she smiled in return. By evening, he had completed the most critical repairs, though more work remained. As he was putting away his tools, Sheriff Johnson rode up to the property. "Norwood," he called, dismounting. "Thought you'd be long gone by now." "Helping Mrs. Thornton with repairs," Vincent replied evenly. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "That's so. Well, just got word that Harlan Briggs was spotted near Cheyenne. Thought you might want to know, seeing as you've been hunting him." Harlan Briggs was indeed Vincent's quarry, a cattle rustler with a $500 bounty on his head. The news should have had Vincent riding immediately for Cheyenne, yet he felt an unexpected reluctance. "Appreciate the information," he said. The sheriff studied him. "You going after him or not?" Vincent glanced toward the house where Sarah stood in the doorway. "Not today," he decided. Johnson looked between Vincent and Sarah, his expression calculating. "Suit yourself, but folks around here aren't likely to forget who you are just because you fix a widow's roof." "Wasn't asking them to," Vincent replied. After the sheriff rode away, Sarah approached. "Was that about your work?" Vincent nodded. "Man I've been tracking was spotted in Cheyenne." "I see." Sarah's expression was carefully neutral. "Will you be leaving then?" "Need to finish your roof first," Vincent said. "Another day or two." Sarah smiled, relief evident in her eyes. "Then you must stay for supper. Emma would be disappointed if you left without saying goodbye." That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table, Vincent found himself talking more than he had in years. He told Emma about the different territories he'd traveled through, described the mountains of Colorado and the deserts of Arizona. He answered her questions about midnight, and even demonstrated how to properly clean a saddle when she expressed interest. Sarah watched this interaction with growing wonder. The stone-faced man she'd first met was still reserved. But with Emma, a subtle warmth emerged, the occasional softening around his eyes, the patient way he explained things, even the slightest hint of a smile when Emma made a particularly amusing observation. After Emma went to bed, Sarah and Vincent sat on the porch, watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of Sarah's roses from the side garden. "Thank you for your help today," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "And for being so kind to Emma. She's missed having a man's influence in her life." Vincent nodded, uncertain how to respond to her gratitude. "She's a good child." "Yes, she is." Sarah paused. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Norwood?" "Vincent," he corrected her. "And yes." "Vincent," she repeated, smiling. "What happened to make you so?" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Stone-faced," he supplied. "I was going to say guarded," she amended. Vincent was silent for a long moment, considering whether to answer truthfully. It had been so long since anyone had asked, since he had allowed himself to remember. "Lost my family," he finally said. "During the war. Confederate raiders came through our farm in Kansas while I was away fighting. Killed my parents, my sister and her husband. Their son, my nephew, died of fever shortly after." Sarah's hand covered his where it rested on the porch railing. "I'm so sorry." "Was a long time ago," Vincent said, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. "Some losses never truly feel distant," Sarah observed quietly. "Jacob has been gone 2 years, but there are days when the grief feels as fresh as it did the day he passed." Vincent looked at her hand atop his small but strong, with calluses that spoke of hard work. Without thinking, he turned his palm upward, closing his fingers around hers. "After I buried them," he continued, his voice low, "something in me changed, like a door closing, felt nothing for years, made bounty hunting easier." "And now?" Sarah asked softly. Vincent considered the question. "Door might be opening, just a crack." Sarah's smile in response was radiant, despite the gathering darkness. "I'm glad," she said simply. That night, as Vincent lay in his hotel bed, he found himself thinking not about Harlan Briggs or the $500, but about the way Sarah's hand had felt in his, and the way Emma's laughter had stirred something long dormant in his chest. The next morning, he returned to continue work on the roof. This time, he brought Midnight along, tethering the horse in the small paddock beside the barn. Emma was ecstatic, rushing out before breakfast to admire the gelding. "He's beautiful," she exclaimed, reaching up to stroke Midnight's velvety nose. "Can I feed him an apple, if your mother doesn't mind?" Vincent replied, glancing at Sarah, who had followed her daughter outside. "I think we can spare one," Sarah agreed, smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm. But breakfast for humans first. Over the next several days, a pattern emerged. Vincent would arrive early, work on various repairs around the property, join Sarah and Emma for meals, and return to the hotel at night. He sent a telegram to a fellow bounty hunter about Briggs's whereabouts, effectively passing the job along. The decision should have troubled him. He'd never abandoned a hunt before, but it felt right. The townsfolk began to take notice of his extended stay. Some, like Albert Jameson, became friendlier, greeting Vincent when he came into the store for supplies. Others, including Sheriff Johnson, remained suspicious, watching his comings and goings with wary eyes. Vincent paid them little mind. His focus had narrowed to the small house at the edge of town, and its 2 inhabitants, who had somehow breached the walls he'd built around himself. One afternoon, a week after he'd first offered to help with repairs, Vincent was replacing a broken window frame when he heard Emma cry out from the direction of the creek. Without hesitation, he dropped his tools and ran toward the sound, Sarah close behind him. They found Emma standing on the bank, pointing frantically at the water where a small orange form was struggling against the current. Butterscotch had apparently fallen in and couldn't make it back to shore. Without hesitation, Vincent waded into the creek. The water was cold and swift from recent rains, but he moved steadily, reaching the kitten and scooping it up before making his way back to shore. Emma took the bedraggled creature, wrapping it in her apron and thanking Vincent profusely through tears of relief. "You saved him," she kept repeating. "Thank you, thank you." As they walked back to the house, the kitten now purring despite its sodden fur, Sarah slipped her arm through Vincent's. "Our hero," she said, her voice warm with gratitude and something more. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed with Butterscotch safely curled beside her, Sarah and Vincent sat before the fireplace. Outside, a spring storm had moved in, rain pattering against the windows and occasional thunder rumbling in the distance. "I received a letter today," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "From my sister in Denver. She wants us to come live with her." Vincent felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "You're leaving?" Sarah studied him. "I haven't decided. Emma loves it here, and we've put so much work into the house already." She paused. "And there are other considerations now." "What considerations?" Vincent asked, though something in her expression made him suspect he knew the answer. Sarah moved from her chair to sit beside him on the small sofa. "You," she said simply, "us, whatever this is becoming." Vincent looked down at his hands, rough, calloused hands that had taken lives and delivered men to the gallows. "I'm not the kind of man most women want around their children." "I'm not most women," Sarah replied, "and Emma adores you." The town will adjust," she interrupted. "They're already seeing a different side of you. Albert Jameson mentioned yesterday that you'd actually said good morning to him. He was quite impressed." Despite himself, Vincent felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. "Setting a low bar for impressive." Sarah laughed, the sound warming him more than the fire. "Perhaps, but it's progress." Her expression grew serious. "Vincent, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that since you came into our lives, there's been more light, more hope than I've felt since Jacob died." Vincent met her gaze. "I've done things, we've all done things," she said gently. "What matters is who we choose to be now, today." She reached for his hand. "The man I see before me is honorable, kind, and far more tender-hearted than his reputation suggests." Vincent looked down at their joined hands. "Not sure I remember how to be anything but what I've been these past years." "I think you do," Sarah said. "I've seen glimpses of it when you talk with Emma, when you saved that kitten today." She hesitated, then added softly, "When you look at me sometimes." Slowly, Vincent raised his free hand to her cheek. The gesture felt foreign yet somehow right, like returning to a place long abandoned but still home. "Don't want to leave," he admitted. "Haven't wanted to stay anywhere in years." Sarah turned her face into his palm. "Then don't leave." The storm outside intensified, rain lashing at the windows, but within the small parlor, something new and fragile was taking root. When Vincent finally leaned forward to kiss her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The following Sunday found Vincent Norwood sitting in the back pew of Willow Creek's small church, uncomfortable in a newly purchased suit, but determined to make the effort. Beside him, Emma fidgeted with her bonnet ribbons while Sarah gently reminded her to sit still. The congregation had turned almost as one when they entered, surprise evident on every face. Sheriff Johnson, seated near the front with his wife, had looked particularly astonished, his eyebrows nearly reaching his hairline. After the service, as people mingled outside, several approached to greet Sarah, and with varying degrees of wariness, Vincent. Albert Jameson's wife invited them to dinner the following week, and the blacksmith, Hank Miller, asked Vincent's opinion on a troublesome stallion he was boarding. "Told you they'd come around," Sarah murmured as they walked home, Emma skipping ahead to collect wildflowers from the roadside. "Might take more than one church service," Vincent replied. "We have time," Sarah said, squeezing his arm where her hand rested in the crook of his elbow. "Time." It was a concept Vincent had stopped considering years ago, when each day blended into the next, marked only by the next bounty, the next trail, the next nameless town. Now, suddenly, he found himself thinking of the future of summer turning to fall, of Emma's next birthday, of rebuilding the old chicken coop behind Sarah's house. Their house, perhaps, someday soon. He'd begun looking for more permanent work in town, and Hank Miller had hinted that he could use help at the smithy. It wasn't a future Vincent had ever imagined for himself, but standing there with Sarah beside him and Emma dancing ahead with her gathered flowers, he couldn't picture wanting anything else. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Emma presented Vincent with a new addition to her wildflower book, a pressed daisy with his name carefully written beneath it. "So you'll always be part of our collection," she explained seriously. Vincent accepted the gift, a lump forming in his throat. "Thank you," he managed, his voice rougher than usual. Emma beamed at him, then yawned widely. "I'm going to bed. Good night, Mama. Good night, Vincent." After she disappeared inside, Sarah moved closer on the porch swing, resting her head against Vincent's shoulder. "She's never called you Mr. Norwood in her mind," she observed. "Always just Vincent." "Smart girl," he replied, wrapping an arm around Sarah's shoulders. They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the plains. Vincent remembered how that sound had once seemed fitting accompaniment to his solitary existence. Now, it was simply part of the nighttime chorus around a place he was beginning to call home. "Tell me something about yourself that no one knows," Sarah said suddenly. "Something from before." Vincent considered the request. There were few secrets left that felt worth keeping, but many memories he'd avoided revisiting for years. "I used to sing," he said finally. "Not well, but my mother said I had a pleasant voice. Haven't sung since before the war." Sarah lifted her head to look at him. "Would you sing something now?" Vincent hesitated, then softly began an old folk song his mother had taught him, about a cowboy riding home to his love after years away. His voice was rusty from disuse, but grew stronger with each verse. When he finished, Sarah's eyes were shining in the gathering darkness. "Vincent Norwood," she whispered, "I do believe you've been hiding your light under a bushel." And then, for the first time in nearly a decade, Vincent laughed, a genuine laugh that started deep in his chest and emerged as a warm, rich sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it delighted Sarah. "What?" he asked, noting her expression of wonder. "Nothing," she said, smiling as she reached up to touch his face. "I just think I'm falling in love with you, that's all." Vincent covered her hand with his own. "Good," he said simply, "because I know I'm falling in love with you." As the stars multiplied overhead and night settled fully around them, Vincent realized that somewhere along the way, the stone-faced bounty hunter had begun to fade, replaced by a man who could laugh again, who could look toward tomorrow with hope instead of indifference. And for the first time in years, he was grateful for it.